Hi there.
Hey. So I see a few people in the waiting room. Let's hold off. I'll let Kevin in.
All right, we're already recording, it looks like.
Okay, I'll pause that. Susan Adams, I'm the Associate Director of Teaching and Learning at Achieving the Dream, and I'm here with an all-star cast of presenters, and I will let them unmute themselves to present who they are.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Dranuski. I am a senior instructional designer at Cuyahoga Community College, and we are located in Cleveland, Ohio.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Goode, and I am an instructional technologist at Cuyahoga Community College in the same department as Kevin.
And my name is Tanya Scott. I'm also an Associate Director in Teaching and Learning at Achieving the Dream.
All right. So I realize I need to make you, or Tanya, can you make Sarah and Kevin co-hosts?
I shall.
And then if you could admit people as they come in, that way I can stick to the deck. All right. So I want to give a little bit of background today about the Every Learner Everywhere network. This is a network that has formed in the last 2 years that is pushing through the envelope a bit here with some innovative technology to help increase student success rates in gateway courses. So together they've partnered with 12 organizations and coordinated an approach to helping colleges and universities use this adaptive technology. The focus has been to improve student outcomes of first-generation college students, low-income students, and students of color. Make sure I've got this here. Oops. Okay. And we're wondering, part of the focus on foundational courses is that first-year introductory and credit bearing continue to have low completion rates and present serious barriers to student success. So adaptive systems have the radical potential to shift education in the service of students by providing a student-centric design based on individual student skill and outcome attainment. So there really is this personalized approach, which we're going to explain in a little bit. Our intended outcomes today by the end of this workshop is that you'll be able to evaluate how technology can optimize your instructional approaches. You'll be able to ensure that course content is in alignment with adaptive learning experiences. So we're going to give you some tips about what it means to align this adaptive experience with course content. We're also going to explore learning analytics and how to analyze those and what data points might you find in this adaptive courseware. And we'll also be talking about student onboarding strategies, which is a key element to the success of adaptive technology in the classroom. So our outline today is that we're going to introduce adaptive courseware and the backwards design planning framework. Then we're going to have a breakout session for about 10 to 15 minutes. We're going to be able to talk with your peers and explore some prompts and questions that we'll give to you. We'll come back and share out. We're going to give a little bit of a break, and actually I forgot to update this slide. It's going to be 5 minutes, not 15. And then we're going to be talking about leveraging learning analytics and the onboarding of students. And then we're going to have a second breakout. We do have a poll coming up because we'd love to get to know you and get a sense of what you know. And I believe Tanya is going to be running that, launching that. Great. Oh, Sarah.
Yeah, that's okay. Just so we can get a feel for your experience, those of you that are with us, what your relationship is with adaptive courseware. If you could just answer this quick polling question and we'll have an idea of your backgrounds.
We're almost there. We have 85% so far. $91, we're very close. Okay, it looks like we've stopped at 91%. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. We'll share the results.
Okay, it looks like more than half of us are somewhat familiar with it. So we've heard of it, but maybe don't know too many details. And then next up would be 31% of you are unfamiliar. And hopefully this session is going to shed a little bit more light on what adaptive courseware is and how you can design with adaptive courseware using the backward design process. And Susan, I think I'll toss it back to you.
Great. And I'm going to toss it over to Kevin.
All right. So those results are kind of what I was expecting, and I'm happy to see because a few years ago I was in the same boat. I've heard of adaptive courseware, but I wasn't entirely sure all the aspects of it. And we were part of a grant program that introduced to it pretty quickly, and it gained steam at our institution. And hopefully we can just share some of the ideas and successes that worked for us. And we're happy to answer questions as we go along the way as well. So what is adaptive courseware? Adaptive courseware, the current promise of adaptive learning is that it's not just a personalized instruction, but also give students agency over their own learning, and also give faculty space to effectively meet students where they are in regards to a current course curriculum or the contents of that. So if we look at this slide of, it provides a little graphic of 3 sample students in a scenario that they're faced with. So continuing the definition of adaptive courseware, it works with, it's a learning system that works with an LMS in this online educational system to modify the presentation of content in response to the student performance. It uses this fine-grained data, which we'll show examples of a little bit later in the presentation. And it uses that data to kind of create this feedback system that loops to create personalized learning pathways for each student. And how does that work? Well, it works differently a little bit for each adaptive courseware package out there. But generally, students answer initial questions, and these can be, the beginning unit assessments. Some professors use pre-tests. But pretty much what it does, it generates additional questions and activities to further their mastery of a particular material or a unit of content. Students can track their own learning throughout this entire process, which helps them engage in their own learning using their customized learning dashboard. So if we look at this image, we have 3 students, and you can see that student A may have taken an assessment test where they necessarily didn't score as well. So what the adaptive courseware system would do is it will introduce content, sometimes remedial content, to make sure that they're caught up and progress through the system. Where student B and C may have had prior learning or experience in a particular topic where it kind of moves them through faster, glossing over content that they're already mastered, and introducing new content sooner. So if we go to the next slide here, continuing the definition of active learning. It's a form of learning in which teaching strives to involve students in the learning process more directly than other methods. Sarah, in the next slide, will show us some reasons why active learning is important, and I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thanks, Kevin. So why is active learning important? Well, active learning, it's going to reinforce certain concepts, skills, and important material that you want your students to know and retain. But it's also going to further develop skills such as the ones listed on this slide, the ability to work in a team, problem solving, written communication, things along those lines, by engaging your students in a higher order thinking. And you're going to see some examples of active learning on the next slide. So here are some of the more common active learning activities we've worked with faculty on. And we encourage faculty to think about what their learning outcomes are, and then choose activities such as these that are going to best help your students meet those outcomes. And it's a good idea to make the connection for your students between whatever your learning activity may be and your unit or course level objectives, just so they see the relationship between this case study, for example, or this peer review, and how it fits into the bigger structure of the course.
Yeah, there's a concept called backward design, which we'll jump into in a little bit, which will help, kind of clarify this. But active learning approaches are not one size fits all. So don't look at this list and say, well, I'm going to do all these. So these are just an example of what you can do. And hopefully this will be a little clearer once we jump into the backward design slides.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. And thank you, Sarah. So thinking also about how and where we place these the adaptive learning experience, this is a great chart that ASU put together. And thinking about it, the adaptive learning experience generally before the class is one great strategy. It can certainly be something that reinforces what happens in class afterwards. But in this case, it generally is about understanding concepts, remembering concepts that you already know and making that connection. And then within the course, having active learning where you apply, analyze, evaluate, and create, possibly in groups. So this is sort of one way that we could place adaptive learning courseware and be thinking about categorically where it lies in sort of the Bloom's taxonomy of learning. And also thinking about that preparing for class. It's a great opportunity for students to go deeper as they're going through the adaptive learning courseware. They're getting prepared for what might be happening in class and getting their cognitive brains focused in on the content and being able to even practice it, right? Or analyze that as what the adaptive system can do. And then apply that within class, within small groups, within assignments, within discussions, even problem sets with classmates, and then being able to assimilate that, right? So the idea could also be improving that what the content is. So thinking about this kind of on the pedagogical wheel here are some ways to think through how can I best use this technology in the framework and how I approach this content and teaching it. It's also important when we talked about alignment, right? What does that really mean? So the preliminary data, and we've actually seen this increasing over time, that having the success is seen when content and activities that are completed in the adaptive courseware match the content and activities occurring in the classroom. So that means there's immediate application and exploration of concepts practiced in the adaptive courseware right in the classroom. So that's where it can get a little tricky, right? So what's happening this week in adaptive courseware and what's happening in the class. So making sure that that's aligned. We've seen where it's been off a week or two, and sometimes that can get confusing for students. So that's where the pre-planning and kind of the alignment question comes into play. So I think this is you talking about formative assessment.
Forgot I was muted. Many of you probably already utilize formative assessment regularly in your classes, and it is a great practice because you can see where your students are at and use that information to inform your instruction going forward. Many of our faculty use the adaptive courseware as a type of formative assessment, and there are different types of adaptive technology, such as machine learning. Some courseware used algorithms, some were rules-based, and others utilized a decision tree type setup, but they're all based around finding ways to help students identify and remediate areas where some type of lack of understanding exists before they get to the big summative assessment piece in the course. So here's your benefits of formative assessment. It's going to catch and address misconceptions early. It's going to challenge students' early analyses, and it's going to provide opportunities for them to revise and redo or resubmit those assignments before the end of the course or the end of the unit.
Right. And Sarah mentioned, working with faculty a few years ago is when we brought a large group of faculty into kind of this pilot study that we did at Cuyahoga Community College or Tri-C here in Cleveland. And we got a lot of questions and we learned a lot. And there were kind of three key decisions to make when designing a course. So when we were taking the approach to design a course. So first, how do we align a student's adaptive learning experience with the course content? And that was new for everybody. So what we did, adaptive courseware ranges from a whole class delivery system to using adaptive courseware in specific sections or units. The instructor has the control from our experience of what aspects of the adaptive courseware that they wanted to use within their class. So we made sure that the units that they were using directly aligned to the outcomes and the objectives within that course. Second, we were wondering how we were going to use the learning analytics data to inform our teaching. And I think one surprise to us was the amount of information in analytics. It wasn't overwhelming in terms of, look at all this data. Well, I think we were surprised with how informative it was and beneficial to the faculty and the students. You'll see, like I mentioned earlier, you'll see a few examples of what that dashboard can look like. But we were wondering, how can we use this information to inform our instruction? Whether that was, creating more formative assessments to get more data points, or, were there specific units where we identified students struggling more, where maybe more supplemental content or materials were needed. And then lastly, how can we effectively onboard students to direct their own learning? So what we found when students understood themselves what adaptive courseware was and how it was going to work within their class, it made the process a lot easier going through the semester. So all three of these decisions will elaborate a little bit. So that will just be in a few slides.
We wanted to take a pause here just for a moment. We've presented a lot of information and presented a couple of concepts. And so before we go into our workbook and our backwards design planning framework, we wanted to invite anyone to come off mute or type a question in the chat.
Corey says that they would like to see an example.
We are going to show a little bit of a dashboard of a learning analytics later on with some screenshots. And I also realized the index. I don't know, Sarah and Kevin, if you happen to have the index for choosing a different courseware. I might be able to pull that up and share that as well. Okay, well, let's continue on with the backwards design.
I think this is me. All right, so you may be familiar with the concept backward design, and if you haven't, it's pretty easy to understand. So what it's doing, it's asking you to take a kind of a different approach when designing your course, just a different way of thinking. So if you look at this chart here, what we're doing is we are beginning by starting with the end in mind. So it's possible to find an effective blend of content for your course, but by placing the learning outcomes or your course objectives in the forefront of your whole course design planning process, it really helps you as an instructor create like an assessment strategy that fosters the learning and provides ample opportunities to accurately measure if your students are meeting those learning outcomes and objectives that you've set forth. By articulating established goals to your students for the course, you can more deeply know where your students, where you want them to end up at the end of the semester or at the end of the quarter. This kind of creates the likelihood that you'll have that you'll see when a student commented or created a content at an entry level point to achieving a learning goal. But you'll find out that you put more thought into the process of a specific activity. It will really help with alignment. It's just a well-crafted approach to a specific lesson that you'll use throughout the course. When students see and understand the outcomes, research has shown that it helps create like relationships between what they are doing, whether it's your activities that you're prepping for your assessments, to where they're going to end up. So the first step is to identify the desired results. And many times these are provided to you at a course level from your curriculum department, or many times, you might have this situation where you're writing your own outcomes or objectives for particular units. Now that you have those identified and established, the next step of the backward design process would be to determine acceptable evidence. And that's simply, how are you going to accurately measure that your students are achieving these outcomes and your objectives for your course? So these are your assessments, your tests, speaking, speeches, projects, demonstrations, whatever it is that fits your discipline. These are the assessments that are measuring the students meeting those outcomes. And then third, you've identified your course outcomes. You've identified how you're going to accurately measure their success. So now it's all the learning experiences that go into it. So what are you going to do to prepare them for those assessments to meet those outcomes? This is your lecture content, your activities, your active learning components, discussion board chats, textbook readings. But by thinking this, you really create the alignment where you can see how each of these learning objects and components connect with one another. And it really helps your students see the big picture, because sometimes you get the question, well, why are we doing this? Well, and this helps answer that question. So let's jump into another poll.
This poll, which Tanya is going to share, is getting a sense of, oh, the question didn't finish. I realized I put it a little too long there, but to what extent have you used the backwards design process when designing a course?
We have 76% complete so far.
Looks like we got a almost close to even spread between exclusively and somewhat. So there is some familiarity here in the group.
That's great.
81, 83, we still have a few responding. Okay, looks like we've stopped at 83. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And I'll share the results. Here we go.
All right. So there were a couple questions in the chat, and I think we're kind of text-based giving some answers, but I wanted to make sure there was some questions around the LMS and the courseware itself. Does Sarah or Kevin want to answer those, or do you want me to take a stab at kind of this question about like how the courseware actually works inside of the LMS?
I think it depends on the vendor, and we worked with multiple different vendors during the course of our experience with this grant. There were some that were imported into our LMS as a course package, and they worked exclusively within our Blackboard instance, and students were never taken outside of it. And then there were others that students were connected via single sign-on to a third party or a publisher's website. So it really just depended on the vendor how that got implemented with the LMS.
Great. And I think also the building of it, there's two options. Often a courseware comes pre-built. So Ruth, you were sort of asking, well, wait a second, do I build it in the LMS and then I build it in the courseware? Often it comes already filled with content, and the students run through a series of questions, and then it adapts to what their answers are and moves them to a different pathway. So that can be already pre-built, and then we ask you to kind of go through it and see if it matches what you would like the content to be. Other instances would be a full build from scratch, right? So you have the platform, meaning the tool itself, and then you put the questions in and the content and you build it. That can take upwards of a whole term to do, usually with a team of people. So you often see that people have already decided on an actual courseware that it matches their content and really does align with what they're wanting to teach. All right. Should we move on here to the next set of the process? I think it's me, right, Kevin? I want to make sure I was set on that.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, cool. So this is the front page of a workbook that we're going to share with you at the end. It's going to give you a nice tool. And so we wanted to give you a little, we call it the digital goodie bag at the end of this workshop, where you'll be able to get to take this home with you. But we're going to run through it. And it's a workbook that essentially gives you question prompts to help you think through the process of the backwards design framework that Kevin presented. So the first one is identify desired results, right? So he's already spoken to this, but in the workbook itself, you can have the questions ready to go and kind of thinking through them and filling them out to get yourself clear in the beginning. So what should learners hear, read, view, explore, or otherwise encounter? What skills will learners master? And what are the big ideas and important understanding learners should retain? So the idea here is, again, going to those learning outcomes. So the backwards design, like where do we want to head into? Where do we want people to be able to get to? And so this is a screenshot in the workbook of, what are your course goals? So in that first stage, that's what you want to be asking for. And we often categorize those into like what's enduring understanding, so the core pieces, and what's important to know and do, and what's worth being familiar with. Sometimes it's nice to categorize those in sort of 3 cases here. And so the knowledge is considered, worth being familiar with, information that fits within the question, and is the lowest priority content information that will be mentioned in the lesson unit or course, right? So this is kind of the first set of questions there to ask to identify those desired results.
Okay. And step 2 of the process, once you've identified your outcomes and your objectives, our second step is now, how do we determine, acceptable evidence of students meeting those outcomes and objectives? So the guiding questions that we ask on this section of the workbook is, how will I know if students have achieved the desired results within the adaptive courseware, and what kind of evidence of understanding and what proficiency levels are you setting in the adaptive courseware experience? So make sure that your outcomes are measurable and that they align to the assessments. And then if you are writing any type of outcomes or objectives or assessments, but just make sure they're referring back to like those SMART goals, that they're specific and measurable. The measurable components of this is kind of what will guide this. How will you know if students have achieved desired results for the entire lesson or the course? And what will you accept as evidence of understanding in non-adaptive portions of the course if that pertains to you? So we're looking at what assessments are needed to provide evidence pretty much that the students understand the material, and this is including all the assessments using the adaptive courseware. And generally, the next step would be having the activities that prepare students for this type of evidence, which I think Sarah is going to jump. Oh, I actually want to show you the page here real quick. All right, and this is what the workbook will look like. So once you've done this, the pages that Sarah has shown you, or I'm sorry, that Susan has shown you, this will be the next page where you'll actually work through the guiding questions of what is acceptable evidence of proficiency for your students meeting those outcomes. And they are prepared for those by doing the learning activities and experiences, which Sarah will jump into next.
All right, so once you've made it through steps 1 and 2 and have identified your desired results and determined the acceptable evidence that your students have achieved those results, you're ready to take a look at designing your learning activities for the course. So what knowledge, facts, concepts, principles, and skills, procedures, processes, strategies do students need? What activities are going to provide the knowledge and skills for your students to meet the desired results? And this is including the adaptive courseware and other activities that you would normally do in your course. We could jump to the next slide. Okay, so this is the workbook page for step 3. You list your activities at the top part, and then at the bottom is what purpose does that particular activity serve? Is it going to introduce, reinforce, assess, or provide feedback for your students? All right, and step 3, it's at this point where you're going to take a good look at where and when the adaptive experience is placed in the course. Consider what type of adaptive experience you would like to provide for your students and let that inform what your course activities need to be. So we're going to take a look at course mapping, and this probably looks familiar to most everybody on this call. When thinking through this process, it's often helpful to utilize course mapping and lining up your course and module objectives with the learning activities and assessments as you go through the structure of your course. As part of this, when you get to the columns for activities and assessments, you can think through what the adaptive technology is going to be used for. Go to the next slide. All right, and course structure. So one way to approach this is to think about the purpose of the adaptive courseware. Do you want the courseware to introduce content to your students? Do you want it to reinforce? Is it going to assess students on content? Or is it going to provide students feedback on their learning? Or is it going to be some combination of these? And depending on the courseware and also your course modality might come into play a bit, you may have a combination of these, and that's okay. All right, if we go to the next slide here. So once you have the purpose of the adaptive courseware in mind, then ask yourself where it should be placed in the structure of the course. So you're going to take a closer look at the more like the module level of your course and determine where your adaptive experiences are going to fit. If it's introducing your content, it's most likely going to be before class or maybe during. If it's giving students feedback, it's usually going to be an after class type activity and so on.
And Sarah, I'll jump in real quick. So
Sure, yeah.
this course mapping, and sometimes if you want to explore further, sometimes it's called like an alignment map. But from a designer perspective, doing this regardless, for your courses, it really helps with the build time of your course. So if you have a new prep and you're building from scratch, I usually print these out and I fill in them with pencil and I sit them on my desk or my coffee table. And then, later in the week, you think of some type of resources or activities that you could do and you fill it in. And when it comes time to sit down and build your course or start applying these adaptive coursewares into your course, you have kind of the whole storyboard of your course lined up. Now you just got to put it together. We also found it helpful when we did this with our faculty that they were sharing these course maps or these alignment maps with their peers and specifically adjuncts who were teaching the class, so they can kind of get a better idea of what resources were available, what others were doing in their classes, and kind of they were sharing resources of, this is better than the one I have. So it's a good tool and I think a good practice to take on, but I just wanted to share that.
Great. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to go into small groups to consider what questions you might have about adaptive courseware in your course and where you think it might be a benefit. Where might this really help in some of the challenges that you might be facing in your course? So we wanted to, I think we've already got the breakout groups set up, but I also, let's see here, we've got about 38 people in the room, Tanya.
Yep, I think one person just arrived. Let me go ahead and assign them. Yes. And I'm also going to pop in the chat the document that everybody will be working in. One moment. There we go. So you'll notice when you open up this document, there are sections for 10 groups. And we have 10 groups that have been created for breakouts. You're automatically assigned, so you'll automatically be navigated over to your breakout group, and you'll have 15 minutes with a 30-second countdown before you come back into the main room. I just want to make sure before I open up the breakout groups, everyone is able to access the document in the chat link.
Maybe we can get a little thumbs up. And also answer any quick questions that people might have before we. All right, thanks.
I think we're good. All right, I'm going to open up all the rooms and we'll see you back here in 15 minutes. Let me just double check that one moment. There we go. Yes, we're good.
And I'll pause the recording.
I have been using adaptive courseware since about 2016 in the field of mathematics. I've used Newton Alta, I've used the ALEX system, and I've been exposed to, but not personally used, like a Pearson adaptive system. And I think the questions that we had in our group of group 6 with Sonia were all the questions that I had. Sonia shared that she's sort of new to using adaptive courseware, and has lots of questions that I have, that I still have of like, what are the best ways to use them? How do you keep students, should you keep students like at the same level at the same time so that group work can work in a certain way versus grouping people based on where they are in a course at a certain time. And so the benefits and challenges of adaptive courseware are common. And I saw someone put that in chat, so I want to like echo what they said, is that we share a lot of the same questions. And one thing that I wanted to add was that how do we use adaptive courseware to show students the future, to help them be excited, not just remediation, but how do we give them things where here are where these basic skills and understandings can lead to, so that they're motivated. So they're like, oh my gosh, algebra is terrible, but it allows me to do this 3 years from now, right? Thank you for the time.
That's a great point. That's a really great point about, that transference of learning and knowledge, and helping students understand that learning is a continuous process, right? So what they're learning now is foundational to what they're going to be learning down the road. So that's an excellent point. Looks like Ruth says publisher materials may have a lot of competencies. Unprepared instructors may choose too many. Great point. Instructors need more training and time to properly set up the learning paths. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's kind of what we did at our institution as part of this grant. I think we had 17 instructors that we used across multiple disciplines to pilot adaptive courseware, and was already said, it's not a one size fits all. So everybody wanted to use a different one, and there is a common theme in your questions here about where do you get started, or there's so many, which one's the right for me? And we actually use that as an opportunity. And Sarah and one of our former colleagues, Jeff Rogers, took on the task of creating an adaptive courseware guide for our faculty. And what we did as part of our department's called the Center for Learning Excellence, and we're made up of instructional designers and technologists and support specialists, that we kind of did that early lift for them, where we examined various adaptive courseware, many of which were named by Daniel, and we kind of looked at it. We looked at what disciplines that they worked for, their compatibility to our Blackboard learning management system, the types of competencies, the customize, how much you can customize the LMS to pick, or I'm sorry, the adaptive courseware where you can pick units and content that does align to that. And what we did, we paired each faculty member with an instructional technologist and an instructional designer to kind of lessen that lift by the faculty member. It was new to all of us, especially our faculty members who were involved. There was zero experience with adaptive courseware. And I don't even know, Susan or Sarah, the turnaround time from when we started to when we launched was very fast. And I give so much credit to our faculty for being good sports about it. But in the end, we had success with every discipline. So the development, which we will be sharing, yes, so I think there was a question, will we share that guide? Yeah, we can share that guide as well. So Sarah or anyone want to add anything to that? I think we're good. So I know where to get started was a common theme, and the cost was a common theme within this discussion. And that was a major concern for us as a community college. We are the lowest tuition community college in the state, so we wanted to make sure that this adaptive courseware wasn't creating any extra burden on the students. And our faculty were big drivers in that. Once they found an adaptive courseware company or vendor that they thought would be appropriate for their course, is really where faculty negotiated the prices per student and the access per student for that particular courseware. And I think that across our 17 courses, the price per student ranged between $25 to I think our maximum was $75. So we were very price conscious. The students appreciated it. The faculty obviously appreciated it. But our faculty were strong negotiators. So some of them said, this is the price. If you can meet it, we'll adopt your product. If not, we'll explore other options. And every vendor came to some type of agreement when it came to cost. And then there was a question about OERs. So I know, Tanya, you had some examples that you might want to share for OERs, or Susan for.
Yeah, I know OpenStax is working on some courseware. And then I think, Sarah, you mentioned Lumen as well.
Yeah, we had our psychology department adopted Lumen, had a lot of success, was very happy with it, and actually expanded the use of that courseware across multiple campuses. Where it started at one of our campuses, it is now being used at multiples. And Susan, were there any others?
Well, and that Lumen example was actually, it couldn't have worked out any better. So we had a full-time faculty, 2 full-time faculties piloted at one of our, we have 4 main campuses, piloted at one campus. The success from it, they made the decision, we're going to adopt this college-wide. So any adjuncts who were teaching sections of this, they jumped in, and these courses were already developed with the adaptive courseware from the work from our full-time faculty. And so it was a fully online course that was conducted using this adaptive courseware, which in March 2020 was very beneficial, because when COVID came and we shut down and we moved 23,000 students online, they never had any hiccups. They just kept operating using the courseware, and the students didn't have any issues. And that was just another success story that we've had.
Ruth had an interesting question. Did the price per student replace what the students would have paid for a text?
Most people do it that way that I've seen, right? Where it could be a replacement of the text, or in the case of building it yourself, that would be your textbook, right? That the courseware kind of acts as that. So there's ways that depending on the design choice would shift the cost for that.
Yeah. Our psychology example, I believe it was $50 per student, and that was replacing a $190 textbook.
Yep. And then Candace indicated 2 themes for their group: hesitancy to add another cost onto students. So I think we've kind of covered that piece, but 2, reliance on a vendor when we might lose the license and the loss of all that design work and having to start over from scratch.
That vendor relationship is very, very important. And I think from the get-go, it's really important to talk about what is that content and how is that can that be utilized? When you're building from scratch inside of a courseware, my understanding is that you get to have that content. That's not going to go anywhere else. That's going to be utilized for you and your students and your institution. Now, if they want to pass that along and share that, then that can be negotiated as well. But those are important things to talk about right from the get-go.
And Linda mentions that Penn Open is another OER company using adaptive courseware as well.
Nice.
And Corey mentions building your own activities, which is a great idea with some branching scenarios.
And Danielle, I want to get back to your comment because it inspired me, where you were speaking to how can we motivate students, right, to see where math can really be applied in their life. And I wanted to kind of speak to, sometimes we say, the technology can't do it all, right? There's a promise in the technology, but it's really you as the teacher that gets to engage in that inspirational, right, piece, right? And engage with the student's prior knowledge, engage with the student's excitement and personal goals in their own life, that then can be applied, these concepts to that, right? So it does take teaching. I mean, adaptive technology can't just be run and done, right? So you added as that element, I think, can really bring that inspiration piece in. So I just wanted to acknowledge that comment. Appreciated it. Other thoughts, comments, or questions?
I think there was one more question I saw, a common theme about just compatibility, like as a challenge, the compatibility with LMS. So our guide, we did do that. We reached out to each vendor and asked them, your compatibility with Blackboard that we're using, were there any VPAT statements for accessibility? But then there was also some vendors that were, linked with Sarah mentioned, the single sign-on that took you outside of our learning environment. So it was really up to the faculty. They have the academic freedom to choose what worked best for them. The important was just the alignment of the content to make sure that content was appropriate. There is a lot of content. I saw that comment a few times in some of these adaptive courseware, but I was actually surprised by the level of customization. So most of the ones I've worked with faculty, they listed all of their outcomes by unit or by chapter, and you were able to go in and do check boxes and select certain aspects of certain chapters that would align to your outcome or the competencies that you want students to be proficient in. So really it gave the faculty the ability to, hand pick some of the content that they wanted to use from the adaptive courseware and pair that with content that they've created themselves. Yep.
And I would say one design that I've seen most popular is, like you said, Sarah, the single sign-on, kind of leaving the LMS and having the experience in the courseware because it's complex and personalized and there's mastery levels, but pulling in the results into the gradebook is a great way for students to see how they're doing, and for there to be that sort of progression of checkbox to-do list checking that I've completed those elements in that assignment. But actually having the experience inside of where it's meant to be has seen a little bit more success with students' engagement with the technology itself. So there's different layers and choice points of what gets integrated in the LMS from the courseware you can choose from. Great. Well, I'm going to share my screen again. Let me make sure I've got the deck and show mode. And we'll kind of get back to that. Oops. All right. Is this me, guys? Just want to make sure I'm on. I think it is.
It's you.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. So this is what's kind of exciting to me about this courseware is that it puts learning analytics in the hands of the instructor in a much stronger, more cohesive way. So as I move through this, I'm going to be answering the question or inspiring you to think about the question is how might you use learning analytics to inform your teaching if you actually had that technology at your fingertips? So we're going to get you kind of under the hood a little bit here to be able to share that the typical data points from an adaptive dashboard are topic mastery completion. So I've mastered this particular topic, and that can be broken down into student or to class. And then the other is topics struggled with, right? So, wow, students are struggling with this particular topic, or I'm seeing a high percentage of the class taking a lot of time to complete this particular objective and set of questions. So it can be framed a little bit differently, but that's typically what we would see. And that can then give you the possibility of doing an intervention with students, suggesting that they get support or come in for some office hours, or using class time to sort of shift your lecture, right? Shift what is going to be spoken of or spent time on in class because you're noticing that struggle is happening. Another data point is time on task. So that's another piece of like, wow, you're spending a lot of time doing this. What's going on there? And maybe doing some more investigation there. And then kind of this knowledge state category, right? So some people deploy a pre-knowledge check. So what do you know before you're engaging in this experience? And then periodic knowledge checks throughout, and then a post-knowledge check. And it's kind of a way to sort of look at the progression of where students might be going. And then often questions are asked of students' confidence level. So how confident am I in the answer that I just gave? I'm feeling pretty unconfident, I'm just sort of guessed, or I'm feeling really confident that, yeah, I got that answer. And that's kind of nice to look over time as well, especially if you're going to meet with a student one-on-one or a group of students, you're able to sort of think through or be able to say, wow, that was a tough one. You got the answer right, but there was still some hesitation. What's that about and how can I support you? And here's a dashboard Sarah was bringing in for us to look at a little bit.
This was a sample dashboard from one of our instructors who was using a Pearson product a year or two ago. And Pearson uses dynamic study modules. Some of you may be familiar with them for their adaptive learning experiences. And for this instructor, those dynamic study modules are indicated by the orange columns towards the top of the page. And this instructor, as we had previously mentioned, most of our instructors use these adaptive experiences as formative assessments. And students in this example were given a point for completing the entire adaptive process. And the way that the dynamic study modules work is when students are asked a question, They're given answer choices, and they can choose to, if they know the answer and they're very confident in it, they click twice and that fills in the answer circle completely. If they are wavering between a couple of answers, they would click the circles next to those two answers that they think it might be, and it fills the circle halfway. So if one of those questions that they answered confidently on, they get correct, that question will not cycle back in another round of questioning. That question will be off the table. But if it's one that they were kind of wavering on, that question will probably appear at some point in the dynamic study module. So it changes based on student responses. The rows indicated in red are students who did not complete the entire adaptive experience in that module. And there's tabs at the top, which with this screenshot, we did not, we're not able to drill down anymore, but this instructor has access to the time spent on each of these modules. So that would be a great data point to take a look at. Some students are spending an inordinate amount of time on a module that could be an indication that we need to go back and use that to inform our future instruction with that particular module. And I'm not sure, there's a little tab for early alerts. I'm not sure if Pearson has rolled that into full production of their dynamic study modules yet, but I believe our instructors who used a Lumen product really liked the fact that it would automatically send emails out to students who were struggling with a particular topic. And Pearson may have started doing this, but it was customized emails that an instructor would set at the beginning. If a student doesn't complete this module, or if they score below this percentage on a module, it would trigger an email to go out to the student, and the instructor would get an alert that this student was struggling on this particular content area. So the data that instructors have access to on the back end, it really varies widely depending on which courseware vendor is used. In this, what you see here, it's not representative of all adaptive dashboards, but it's a sample of some of the basic information that you'll have access to and can use to inform your teaching in the future.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. I'm just putting some stuff in the chat. I'm so excited that Renee shared the adaptive learning courseware implementation guide that actually my colleagues and I wrote in 2017, but we did a whole new one in 2020 that's more the latest and greatest, but very similar content. So I put that link right under Renee's share, as well as the courseware selection guide that we have from EdSurge. It's a product index. So we put that in the link as well, as that question has come up a couple of times there. So you can see those links available. So then back to the workbook, which we're going to also share at the end, is that learning analytics to inform teaching. So how will you leverage learning analytics to inform your teaching? And we're going to let you go into breakout groups and kind of think through what you might do with this kind of data. And the workbook prompts you to do that inside of this page here that we've just done a screenshot on, but we'll share that with you at the end. And then there's just this little slide about when to use the data points, right? So now you have this data. So the idea here is just thinking through, how could I do this? So preparing for class, you might look at the dashboard before class to look at that class level mastery of various topics and the topics struggled with, as well as post knowledge check. So post a certain objective or a certain set of topics. And then looking at overall student confidence. We found that it's pretty powerful for students to hear a faculty member say, I noticed that in this particular activity, a couple of you or many of you or 60% of you struggled or were really feeling confident with that. And that launches like, oh, I'm part of this, a statistic here, right? And that can really empower students to say, I need to get in there and be doing this work so that I can be part of that analysis that my faculty member is doing. And then working with individuals. So a time on task data set would definitely be a time where you could do an intervention with a student. And then that individual mastery level, as well as individual topics struggled with and confidence levels. So you can go right into an individual student as well as swing back out to a larger group of your class.
All right, and when we were onboarding our faculty in our adaptive courseware journey a few years ago, one thing that became evident was that the faculty were sharing that students weren't very clear what this adaptive courseware was. So we had a strong need to make sure that the students understood how adaptive courseware, or what it was and how it was going to be used in their course and how they can use it to benefit their education. So some of the things that we'll share some examples on the next slide, but some of the things that we identified as things that students need to understand is how the technology kind of illuminates what they understand in the concepts that they still might be struggling on, using those data points that we discussed on the slide prior to this. Also, how it puts the student in the driver's seat of their own learning. So using their specific dashboard and identifying their data points can help them. And how their dashboard can be personalized to track their own progress and their mastery of specific points in the course. And the intention of this is not to create more work for them. It actually is intended to help them learn faster, study more efficiently, and retain knowledge. So instead of doing work on something that they're very confident on, as Sarah was mentioning, it allows them to prove their proficiency in a specific topic and then move on to the next level of content that they have to achieve to gain the mastery for that topic. And we'll show some examples, like I said.
And it's always a best practice to let your students know, and in full disclosure, how you're going to be using their performance data in the class. How are you using it? Why are you using it? I'm using this to show, aggregated data on how you're performing on this particular learning objective, or I'm using this data to reteach this concept because. Let them know what you're capturing, and during the whole onboarding process is a great opportunity to lay that out for them.
Yeah. Okay, next slide. So we have some examples that were successful for our faculty members. We found that adding a section to their syllabus is a syllabus statement about defining what adaptive courseware is and how it will be used in this course or in their course. We've had faculty do in-class explanations or even demonstrations in the course where they have the entire class there. And sometimes they even completed an activity together, and the faculty member was able to show them in just an easy introductory activity to show the students how they can access their dashboards and how the faculty might use the entire class aggregate data to share that with the class. Of the information that they receive. For online classes, we had some faculty create video orientations. Sometimes some vendors had these materials for us, so that the faculty didn't have to create all of this themselves. But we use many of these as starting points and adapt it to their own disciplines. Or regularly, I mentioned this, regularly sharing student data in class is an additional way to kind of give the whole class a view of where we're going in areas that might be more difficult for students, et cetera, without revealing student specific data. Yep. And then this is also a page in the workbook that you'll be receiving at the end of this, guiding those questions with some examples as well. And there it is. All right.
Great. So now we're going to actually share the workbook with you, which you can download, but we want to give you a chance to kind of play with it with each other, see where it might be of support to you. And so let me go ahead and put that in the chat. I think I have it here. So. And it's actually been updated a little bit with a little bit nicer graphics. So you'll see when you download some of the screenshots we had in there a little bit different. Let's just make sure we got it there. Mm-hmm. Oh, and then the worksheet too. Okay, yep. So we have two different documents for you to share or to look at. So we like this idea of being able to collaboratively note take together. So the second link that Tanya put in there is for you to work in your small groups to answer the question, where in your course will adaptive courseware be utilized or offered to your students? And what types of analytics would you want to gather? So how would you use it to inform your teaching? So we want to kind of think about, again, the design process of, alignment. Where would you place this in your course? But also what analytics might you use? And I think this would be a great time for you to ask questions of your peers about how they've done it and what you might experiment in utilizing it in your course.
So just like before, you are automatically assigned to a room. The rooms are almost the same. There's been a little bit of shifting since we've started, and their worksheet is there. And you'll have 20 minutes together for this exercise. I'm going to go ahead and open up all the rooms. See you in a little bit.
And I was in group 6 with Zach and Daniel and Carolina. And for how we're using or anticipate using the adaptive courseware, we can use it for supplement, for homework, and to reinforce student learning. We can use it as a way of pre-assessment to determine if the students have a certain amount of knowledge before we begin to do instruction on specific topics. Also for remediation, to give additional support around certain topics, and then use it as a means to provide a customized review before we administer a large assessment, like a test or something like that.
Lots of opportunity for differentiated instruction in there. Wonderful.
And did you want me to go on to the next question, or,
Oh, yeah,
or are you going to
please.
do those separate? Okay.
Yeah.
So we also discussed the ways that we would like to use analytics from the adaptive courseware that we would choose. We said to look at student completion and performance and the time that they spent on certain topics. And that's again to help us with preparing our instructional approaches to our topics. And then also looking or having different checkpoints within the course to identify students that are at risk. So not just topic focus, but looking at, I guess, like an intervention so that they can be successful by the end of the course and not just on specific topics. And then the other thing is to use it for performance and student confidence level. So that, again, we can look at interventions and adaptations to the instruction. And then lastly, we said, and this was a good point at the very end, we were discussing at the very end about behavior. So not necessarily for shameful comparison, but looking at behavior so that we can help students modify their behavior, because we know that most students only do their homework and only do the majority of their work right before a due date. And so, and so it was brought up how continual activities bring about better success. And so that's another way that we could use the analytics to motivate students to do work systematically and periodically throughout the course and not just at due dates.
That's a really great point, because we talk about the power of analytics within ourselves, right? So we look at the data ourselves to make decisions about how we're instructing, but making that transparent to students, I think, is really critical, right? They can become more, they can take agency over their own learning with that. So I think that's a fantastic idea. Wonderful. Thank you. Lots of great ideas there.
Yeah, we were a great group.
All stars. Wonderful. Well, everybody here is all stars. Gold star though. Excellent. Anyone else would like to share?
I'm just going to share one small thing. It was really funny. My group was just one other person, and we were both from the same community college.
Great. Did you know each other?
Yes.
Oh, okay, perfect.
We're both in the same department.
Oh.
Instructional designers. So it just gave us a few minutes to brainstorm, you know, and this is like a big project that you guys talk about implementing. And we were just saying, for us, we're going through Achieving the Dream program right now. So for us, just thinking about how this could be something in our plan that we are writing out right now, and something on a small version of that. So maybe encouraging our faculty. We have what's called release conditions within D2L learning management systems. So they could build something like that on a small scale in their course, and maybe just seeing if the faculty, some of them would do a small little pilot on picking a concept a students struggle with and just doing that on a smaller scale.
Great idea. Great idea. Especially as you're socializing everybody, you know, to the use of adaptive courseware, starting small. Yep.
Yes, because like right now, big is not going to happen. The
Right.
other thing is our D2L new contract with D2L includes what's called Performance Plus, and it's a really great data analytics software that gathers a lot of data. So we're very excited to be able to get that new feature in our new contract. So it would help for the faculty to be able to, because a lot of it is going to allow the faculty to gather that data, not just that plain user progress that everybody has in their learning management systems. It's a lot bigger than that. So
Fantastic. And you're giving the faculty the power to have access to that data on hand without having to ask for it or wait for it. Wonderful.
yeah.
Great. Excellent. Thank you. I think we have time for one more share out.
Jump in.
Yeah.
We had an interesting group. None of us are actually currently teaching courses. I'm an instructional designer. Brian is a department chair, and Alex is a postdoc. So we brainstormed. And there's various ways that different kinds of adaptive courseware can be used in different parts of courses, depending. And as an instructional designer, I can tell you the correct answer is almost always, it depends.
Yep.
Problem sets, adaptive problem sets can be used to replace do the odd problems at the end of the chapter. So it's a post-lecture practice that gives the student targeted practice at what they need practice in. So they get that kind of question right a couple of times in a row. It quits asking that kinds of question and moves on to a more difficult one or a different kind, or it changes things around. That can also be used as a pretest to assess the student's state of knowledge before you walk into the lecture. And I've long advocated we use Blackboard, using a quiz over the chapter before the lecture and look at the results 10 minutes before class to see, okay, look, they get topic A, they get topic B, topic C, they're a little rough with, so we're going to emphasize topic C. That way you're not wasting anybody's time. And the results I get back from the faculty are, that is amazing. So actually that's kind of an expanded or meta view of adaptive courseware, where the lecturer, the human being, is in the loop as part of the whole courseware system, where you're using the technology to provide data that will impact the live presentation in meet space, and then go back to cyberspace for more practice. Another possibility is to use an adaptive, or let's say a branching scenario, to give students practice playing with an idea before meeting in class. And then everybody has had this shared experience, and now let's talk about it and unpack it and take it to the next level. So there's a variety and I have a microbiology instructor who's doing that with PowerPoint, branching scenarios that he's creating in PowerPoint with, I think he's looking at different preparation techniques for different kinds of microorganisms and different kinds of investigations, that you want to use. And okay, you chose, this substrate and this incubation temperature and this, humidity condition, and here's what your petri dish looks like. Okay, try it again. Play with different conditions. And so then you come into class, and now students, instead of having a formulaic way of looking at things, they have kind of a bigger picture idea that, okay, this kind of microorganism likes this kind of environment, and that kind of microorganism like that kind of environment. And so it gets them a level up. So there's a variety of ways that you can use this and as an instructional designer, that's really exciting because it just gives me more toys to play with, more ways to address the problem. You could also use it as a capstone kind of activity. And I posted in the link, some folks in Canada are doing some remarkable things with community learning, and it's all open source. So you can download the source code. It's an HP5, but they have really super high production value videos with a great deal of emotional content. Really well-produced stuff. Anyway, I'll stop talking.
No, that's amazing. That's great. A lot of good information there. I love how you brought up the flipped classroom model, because when we think about adaptive courseware, we're automatically thinking, oh, this is 100% online, right? But it need not be, right? You can leverage it for a face-to-face class, and that flipped classroom is like my favorite, right? I think because you can leverage the power of the technology and then use your face-to-face time for that face-to-face activity. That's so critical. So I think, and then the power of practice you mentioned, right? Yeah, go ahead.
And that doesn't mean that every class session has to be flipped.
Right.
There are a lot of students that like lectures.
Yep.
That they don't want a totally flipped classroom. And I'm going to tell them, my wife, she's one of them. You know, multiple degrees, honors, chords, the whole 9 yards. But she likes lectures. Talk to me, teach me. I'm happy to do this online activity stuff, but I want to ask you a question and get an answer. So keeping an open mind, keep all your options open. I'm a big fan of that.
Thank you,
I
Corey.
also like the first one doing the pre-assessment. It kind of reminded me, like when I used to be in K through 12, we did the KWL charts, and just finding out where are your students, because I know sometimes if you want to get them engaged, you've got to know where they're at. If you don't know where they're at and you're teaching something they already know, you've lost them. So great suggestion.
Great stuff. Excellent. Thank you so much. And that takes us to Susan, I believe.
All right, let me see if I can share this. I think we're actually just coming to the resources at the end. Just wanted to make sure, and maybe we can put the whole solve link really quick. Tanya, I put it in the ROS. There's a whole website that has all kinds of resources. I've linked to specific resources before in the chat, but the link that Tanya's about to put in is our Solve website that's sponsored by Every Learner Everywhere. And I just put a couple screenshots here. It's really comprehensive and allows you to search via the role that you play. So I love the instructional designers that are on the call can certainly go to just the instructional designer resources, faculty resources, administrators. And then there's sort of overarching topics such as case making, right? If we want to start an initiative, how do we case make that at our institution? What does it look like to have a comprehensive faculty development program to support this? And then what are some basics? And then the courseware selection piece. And we've already shared the resource that you'll find there, but we're adding resources as we go. And this has been a big push with the Every Learner Everywhere network and all of its partners to create assets to support all of your work in this area, both in experimentation and research side of it, the implementation side of it, and then the impact piece. So that's there for you and available. I want to make sure I'm looking at the chat too. And I just want to thank everybody's engagement. This has been so great to have some, I would say, experts doing this work already to show up to this call and share their experiences, and also folks that are really new and have lots of questions. I think the alchemy of that has just been wonderful. And we really wanted to make this less of a webinar and more of a conversation, which is why we made it a meeting room. And you all stepped right up to the plate to that. So I have a lot of gratitude for that. And also my co-presenters. So thank you, Kevin, Sarah, and Tanya for your work in putting this together with me.
No problem.
And we welcome any last questions or comments before we close it out, and also making sure for my presenters I didn't miss anything at the end.
No, I would just echo, thank you, everybody. And, I've learned a lot myself from the participants. I have some links and notes here that to follow up myself. So thank you.
And I've also will be looking at the recording. We kind of just give it some edits at the beginning and end. So that'll take me about a day. And then I will PDF this deck, which will have the links in it available to you, and send it out in one big mass BCC'd email. So you'll see that in the coming days so that you have the resources you need. And feel free to reach out to any of us at any time with direct questions. We are here to answer those, and we would not be bothered in any way, shape, or form to be contacted directly. And those contact details will be in the follow-up email as well. All right, I'm going to stop the recording. There we go.